Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. This is Joanne Lacey from the Mobile Ecosystem Forum. We're just waiting for everyone to join, and then we'll get started with this webinar on RCS business messaging best practices. Right, let's get started. So welcome again. Thanks for joining us today. So today's webinar is all about taking you through the MEF's RCS business messaging guidelines that were launched a couple of weeks ago. Obviously the mobile industry continues to evolve and progress the rollout of RCS, but when it comes to business messaging, then implementation can be at times complex due to fragmentation, but also, of course, the very nature of an open standards-based messaging platform. And this lack of alignment on key options can limit scalability and effectiveness, which is why the best practices from MEF's working group and Future of Messaging programme were published. Just a brief word for those of you who don't know MEF, then these guidelines are part of MEF's Future of Messaging programme, which launched 5 years ago and has two key goals: to combat fraud and to support market development and education. And these guidelines are obviously part of many of the different reports and guidelines and working groups within the programme. So we launched the first version of the RCS business messaging guidelines just under a year ago at Atlanta ITW, and the goals were to reduce friction in the market and help accelerate market adoption. You can see there were many topics already covered in version 1, including commercial templates, interconnection, and permission management. Of course, a lot has changed since then in the world, and while good progress has been made with some good use cases, some great trials and more information, then true market adoption will require greater alignment on the technology and business practices to deliver full interoperability. The guidelines that we have today, we will take you through. I have David O'Byrne who worked on the guidelines, and Dario Betti, MEF CEO, will help walk you through the guidelines that we have. But before we kick off, just a thanks to the contributors, to the MEF members of the working group and the wider ecosystem who contributed to the latest updates on these guidelines. So Dario, I think you wanted to say a few words before we let David kick off.
Sure. Well, thank you, Joanne. Great to be here. And the second options we have to talk about best practices. When we spoke the first time last year, we thought that, we have a best practice document. Let's see what happens. And in itself, we introduced it as the result of about 9 months of discussions between members and our association, etc. The actual process was the real interesting part. And so coming out with an outcome was a fantastic achievement and very well received in terms of downloads, in terms of numbers. We've seen it referenced. So we're pretty happy. Well done to Joanne and to David. Now, the second version doesn't mean that things were not going so well. The opposite, as it was mentioned by Joanne as well, we've seen a very interesting deployments. We have very important things happening in the industries. So things have developed, things have moved on. We've seen Japan launching, we've seen a joint venture in USA, we've seen gold markets like Germany, where we were announcing just 3 months ago. And a lot of things are happening, a lot of important realizations are also taking place. So I think the fact that there is a 2.0, it's a bit of a witness. It's itself a statement of how quickly things are developing in RCS. Are they quick enough? Well, the answer is probably no. We would like a much faster adoption. COVID allowing and other things allowing, the omen seems to be right. But to get it right, the joint collaborations, the joint harmonization, it's really key. And I'm very glad that these process of discussions has not stopped last year with the announcement of a first business messaging, but has keeping on going. And still today, it's happening with so many of the topics. As a matter of fact, to David, I will every now and then remind where, as MEF, we're having continuing discussions and on different topics here and there. Anyway, enough from me. I promise I'll stay quiet now. You want to hear from David. So, Joanne, David, it's all up to you.
Thanks, Dario. So if anybody wants to ask any questions, then if you just use the Q&A functionality, you can see that the guidelines that David will take you through. We have 4 new sections in version 2, as well as some other topics that had new recommendations. So I'll walk you through them all. If you want to ask questions after any of the sections, then just pop them in the Q&A. We'll also have a Q&A session at the end with Dario and Dave for a more general discussion. So David, over to you.
Thanks very much, Joanne. Thanks, Dario, and thanks to everybody for joining the webinar today. Can we go next slide, please? Great, thank you. So since we did the first version of the document in June of last year, as Joanne said, a lot has happened in terms of rollouts in the market and the gathering of new information, the emergence of new models. To try and map that to the specific changes we made in the new version of the document. First of all, P2A model emerged, where RCS was seen as a way for customers to find businesses rather than businesses to talk to customers. So we added a new section on discovery, which is one of the key topics there to try to flesh out some of the issues around that. We saw the charging model starting to stabilize as both the Google Guest program and steps that had been taken by a number of the operators in the market started to coalesce. So the charging model started to emerge. So we did bring in a topic on the commercialization of discovery and also on new innovations in charging, but basically the commercialization sections seemed to not change that much. We noticed that there was very little international interconnect, and the feedback that we got from both carriers and aggregators was that it wasn't seen as a priority. Getting national interconnect and national coverage and more gold markets was very much the priority between 1919 and 1920 and continues to be. And we added some more analysis of scenarios and international interconnect, but we see international interconnect very much as the next step, with the step that we're in right now being consolidating in each individual market. We saw Google's leadership role emerging and becoming more assertive in RCS as they started to roll out the Google Guest program in more and more countries and to add business messaging to that program. We also saw the change towards the end of March when the GSMA migrated from RCS being a special program as part of future networks for them to more part of their business as usual program. And so the topic of interoperability and how the ecosystem would remain and would remain diverse with a number of different but equal vendors was a big concern for us. There were, of course, a lot of issues about privacy and security. Back in 2019, WhatsApp had a very bad hack. A number of other OTT messaging systems had bad hacks that they had to deal with, and Facebook had a lot of questions about its handling of data privacy. So because they were topical, we added new sections on security and privacy. We saw maybe a more siloed market emerging, and with sender verification being important, but it being very much locked into the provision of the platform. So Google were doing it, but only for them. Some of the carriers are doing it, but only for their customers. So we saw the need for transferable sender verification or interoperability in sender verification, and we addressed that in our fraud section. And then finally, and we'll come to this at the end, we got a lot more market feedback on adoption and on blockers to adoption. So aggregators have been out there fighting the good fight, talking directly to customers and to their marketing agencies and hearing their feedback. And we incorporated that into the document where we could with two specific bits of feedback on client coverage and operational efficiency. So let me go straight into the first main topic. Next slide, please. Chatbot discovery. Obviously, it's the cornerstone of the PWA experience, and there are multiple different ways of doing it. It also opens new commercial models, and the key recommendation we have here is that it should enable and not slow down the market, and that it should be simple, quick, and cheap to register a chatbot. Next slide, please. Now, I'm not going to, sorry, if you go up one, please. I'm not going to go into all of the different ways of doing discovery. Yes, that's great. That's a shot from the document. I encourage you all to read through it. Needless, there are a number of different ways, please. Our recommendations out of this are as follows. First of all, chatbot discovery and chatbot positioning is a commercial activity. It is in the search world. It is in every other field of e-commerce that if you pay more, you can get your product or your service prioritized. So all participants should assume that it will be monetized in chatbot discovery too. Secondly, in order to be successful, we strongly recommend that there be low barriers to entry for chatbot registration and chatbot discovery. It should be very straightforward to make sure that the services on your directory reflect customer expectations. And by that, I mean there should be a broad number of suppliers of different services. There is very little point in having a chatbot directory entry for pizza that only has one pizza provider when the customer knows there are at least 20 different pizza providers in their immediate vicinity. So keep the barriers low and assume that success means having lots and lots and lots of chatbots on the platform. Connection to offline discovery, be that by texting to shortcodes to initiate chatbot discovery or using QR codes or a number of other methods that we go into. We think it's very important to draw a line between offline discovery and the name of a chatbot and its identity on the service. The process for registration should be simple and cheap, especially for SMEs, and we come into more to that later. And we got feedback on the potential in the future for an ICANN type registry where each chatbot name would be unique globally to prevent squatting and to prevent misdirection of customers to a chatbot that sounds like the name of the chatbot they were looking for. Maybe a topic for the future, certainly no need for it now, but an interesting future problem to keep an eye on. Can I ask, are there any questions just on the topic of discovery? Joanne, anything?
Everyone's on mute, so no, then there's nothing in the chat, so let's keep going and we can come back to that.
Grant. So if we go next slide, please. The next topic is interoperability, and I chose this graphic to show that even for something as simple as power supply, there are multiple ways of designing the interoperability parts of it and multiple ways to get it wrong. RCS's strength has always been that it is an open standard and that any company that wants to can download the specifications, feel assured that there is no intellectual property hidden inside that specification. It can build a client or a server or a map service, and it can sell it on the open market. And not only should it work, it should also be completely interoperable with anybody else who is following the same standard. That is what gives us a diverse ecosystem. However, a diverse ecosystem means that you have to have a level playing field. Every company needs to have the same access to the documents, the same access to testing and accreditation, and the same access to the market. A number of the roles that ensured this level playing field were carried out by the GSM Association, particularly the Functional Requirement Group, the Specification Development Group, to put the spec together, and then the work that was done in the TSG, the testing group, where a test spec would be produced and test events would be ran, and a series of accredited devices and network providers would be announced on the GSMA's website. It's critical that as the GSMA migrates away from this being a key activity for them, that something is done to make sure that those activities stay in place. Remember that RCS depends on network effects in the way that something like WhatsApp clearly doesn't. If everybody is not able to do it and we don't all work well together, then we are reduced to a bunch of individual companies wildly underpowered trying to deliver an OTT against a giant company delivering an OTT. It's only through network effects that really even the operators are able to play in this space. If we go next slide, please. So our recommendations in this space, first of all, implement the specification as is. The vendors, the companies that are building out the solutions, should be encouraged not to tweak the specification to make it special to them, or to ignore parts of the specification to eliminate them, because those tweaks and those deficits in their solutions will result in interoperability challenges. For operators, it's strongly suggested that they should buy specification meeting solutions. So there is an accreditation scheme, and there will continue to be. So it should be simple enough to say we will only deal with companies whose clients and whose network solutions are accredited as meeting the specification. It might seem convenient or clever to do something else in the short term. In the long term, you do not end up with an open standards-based solution. I think it's worth pointing out that even the Google Guest solution benefits from interoperability. Google have always said that their plan is to migrate countries that they've launched with their Google Guest OTT solution over to operator control. If they do that, that means that their solution will need to interoperate possibly with operator commissioned clients, with Samsung clients, with clients from other vendors. So it will also benefit them in terms of issue solution down the line if there is interoperability between their solution and everybody else's solution. Likewise, it's highly unlikely that every network will end up being delivered by Google. It's certainly not the case at the moment. So their clients, which they still have an interest in, even if they're not on their network, need to work and interoperate on other people's network equipment. So interoperability is something that they should take more seriously rather than less seriously than anybody else. Aligning on the current version of the specification as soon as possible. Where an operator has not rolled out the latest version of the spec, now is a great time to do that. The rate of specification is slowing. It's a good time to try and catch up to the latest version. An accreditation process. Now, as I said, the GSMA provided this and did a great job of providing this for many years. My understanding at present is that the terminal steering group within the GSMA will continue to produce a accreditation process and test cases, and it will become more like the way VoLTE or VILTE are self-accredited. So there will be a specification there, you can get accredited. Remains to be seen whether traces will need to be provided. I believe the way it works with VoLTE is traces do not need to be provided unless there is a discrepancy or a failure to interoperate, and then the adjudication process involves the traces. So still waiting for the detail to emerge on that, but it looks as though TSG within the GSMA will continue to do an accreditation process. It's critically important that they do, or somebody does if they don't. Ensuring parity in the accreditation process, something like what TSG are proposing in terms of self-accreditation may actually be an improvement on the current process or the process up till now, where a few companies would be invited into a test event. They would all be accredited against each other. And then the idea is that those clients, those networks should act as benchmarks for other solutions. The problem was there was no incentive for benchmarked or accredited solution providers to provide their technology to other companies. In fact, there was a disincentive because they were enlarging the pool of vendors. A system based on self-accreditation is probably going to be more inclusive and more democratic, and in that case, then it's a step forward. And finally, the feature development discussions. Even though GSMA is winding up the Global Functional Requirement Group, that may not be the right phrase, let's say slowing down the amount of work going through it. We believe, and the feedback that we received from players all around the ecosystem is that somebody should continue to discuss new use cases. Somebody should continue to look to develop a pipeline of new functionality. And there are discussions within the mobile ecosystem forum to convene a group to do that. Exactly what that group would produce and how they would interoperate with the specification writing role, which still sits within the GSM Association, all still to be worked out. But I think it's important to note that none of the competitors are stopping feature development, and therefore, if RCS is going to be successful, they shouldn't either. Dario or Joanne, do we have any questions so far on the chat?
Yeah. Thanks, David. So first question, who do you think is best placed to take advantage of monetization when it comes to chatbot discovery?
That's a good question. It's hard to answer that, Mariam, because the architecture of the different solutions is quite different. The original launch with AT&T, which is likely to be carried through with CCMI in the States, but that organization best placed to be monetized because they are the ones that are basically producing the prioritized results. The short answer is whoever is producing the results when a customer asks for pizza in or
Oh, we're losing you, Dave.
Can order online most of the money in chatbot. Can you still hear me?
We can now, yeah.
Okay.
Could you repeat just the last few sentences?
So the last sentence was, if I remember rightly, it is whatever organization is sorting all of the brands out and deciding what order they will produce the results in, that's the one that's going to take advantage. In clients that are hosted by Google, that will probably be Google. In Japan and the US, that will likely be CCMI or the Japanese operators working together. And then in Europe, you will have a number of different solutions. Each solution is quite unique country by country.
Thanks, Dave. And thanks for the question. Okay, I'm just conscious of time. So if we move on to the next one. Yeah. On privacy.
So privacy, and going here on the 6th annual Consumer Trust Report that the Mobile Ecosystem Forum produced recently. Some of the stats on privacy are that 71% of consumers globally rate it as very important, and almost half of customers at 38% are reluctant sharers of information. They feel that they don't have a choice to share personal information if they want to use the service at all. However, there is other data out there that informs us that customers or consumers are happy to share, provided it is done in a trusted way and provided they feel that they are getting value for the information that they're providing. So key thing is trust is key. And secondly, compliance, particularly if you're in a country where GDPR pertains, compliance is a heck of a lot cheaper than not complying, because the fines that are associated with GDPR breaches are massive. And the inclination, I believe, of the courts and the adjudicators is to impose fines, because, particularly on bigger companies, because consumer trust is really seen as a key thing that has, not been taken seriously by some of the big companies to date. If we go next slide, please. Yeah, so it's not terribly surprising that our first recommendation is to go and do a data privacy impact assessment. There are a number of companies there that can do that, can map your flows and identify the risks and develop mitigation. What was probably more surprising is that P2A channels represent more of a risk than outbound channels. This is due to the customer telling you some information that you maybe even didn't even solicit. But if you store all of the content of that chat, or perhaps use that chat as one of hundreds that you might use for training people in your call center, or even for training your AI system, this got personal information could be swimming around in your system. You might not even be exploiting it. You are potentially liable. So the policy should be to make a strict rule that only anonymized data is captured for training purposes or for using to train up AIs. And where you can, where you don't need to retain the information, all of the content of chats should be deleted as soon as it's included. We call out references to some of the existing standards, 27701, the OECD guidelines, the GDPR guidelines, of course, in the EU. And every country has now got some sort of local data protection watchdog or data protection ombudsman. So there is a lot of documentation out there to inform you as to how to do it. I guess our key recommendation here is trust the customer. It really pays off to be transparent. Customers are way more aware and way more informed of the pros and cons of sharing their personal information now than they were 5 years ago. So put your policy somewhere, inform the customer where to go look for them, and let them decide how they should interact with you. If we go next slide, please. Unless there are specific questions on privacy, I'd like to go straight through into security. So security, again, major section was added to the document. One of the issues that has bedeviled RCS since the beginning is this concept of end-to-end encryption, and people saying, well, it's not end-to-end encrypted, it can't be as good as something that is, without really understanding what end-to-end encryption means and the value of it for the customers. So what we did was we looked at security, but we looked at the different stakeholders in the RCS messaging chain and the different roles and the different actions that they should take. We talked about end-to-end encryption to provide information and a point of reference for operators and aggregators who are facing this pushback that RCS isn't end-to-end encrypted. To give you some talking points and some data to show that even if it is end-to-end encrypted, doesn't necessarily mean that it's secure. We talked about data security good practice, and we expanded on that from simply recommending that good practice be applied to actually calling out and documenting what we feel is good practice across data security, again, as a point of reference. And we talk about some specific risks, particularly in the P2A context, from people using attachments in P2A messages to try to insert viruses or malware into operators' environments. Go next slide, please. So our recommendations here, first of all, are around taking an end-to-end view of security and encryption. So each message that is sent, first of all, is stored at the brand or at the marketing agency, which is frequently a place where the interception or the hack actually takes place. It's then with the aggregator, with the map service provider, across the network through the operator, and then out to the client's handset. What we do is we look at each link in that chain and identify its requirements, and where possible point towards policies that they should adopt. We talk about customer education and the need to be specific on what brands need to be specific when communicating to their customers, and tell them, for example, we will never ask you for your password, or we will never ask you for this piece of information or that piece of information in our communications. So we can educate the customer, and the customer gets to know over time, if somebody's asking me for that, I need to look twice to check who this is actually coming from. Is this really coming from my bank, etc. To be a little bit more careful. We talk about the use of grey routes, which we believe is creating a much greater cost in terms of the lack of security and trust than any short-term cost saving that it might attract. And then we look at some of the specific risks that P2A and RCS bring in terms of phishing, impersonation, malware, and social engineering and denial of service attacks. Any questions on privacy or security?
I just wanted, there's a question, just sticking with the theme of P2A, but going back a step on one of the updates on discovery. Can you comment on P2A from Google versus P2A from the RCS vendors and MNOs?
Well, it's easy enough to comment on P2A discovery and P2A search in Google, because it doesn't exist, and they have for many years made the case that first of all, they felt that web search is the paramount way for a company to find, for an individual to find a company, and they don't want to dilute that. I suppose, given that they have a sort of a very strong position in search, they don't want to dilute that. And the ways that customers can instead find businesses is, maybe through maps or through other apps that they have, or indeed through messages. And like that, they can find companies, but they won't put in a directory as such. They've also said that this is a position that is under review on a constant basis by them. When RCS really takes off and is the dominant system on all devices, I have no doubt that they will look to introduce a P2A directory in the client, and will move towards supporting in-chat search. I've no doubt about it. But they're just not yet there. RCS, in terms of volumes and numbers, is not yet there. And I can imagine that within Google, it's a very hard conversation for the RCS folks to convince the search folks that they should introduce something that would basically be an internal competitor and internally cannibalizing their hegemony in search. So I think it's an internal Google issue. I think it also constitutes a fantastic opportunity for operators to get into this space, provided they are willing to invest in their own infrastructure, their own solution, because I think the reason Google treated as a potential risk to search is because it is a threat to search. And if people can find the business they want within their messaging app, that's where they will find it, and they won't use the Google search bar anymore. Convinced of that.
Okay,
if we go next slide, then please. Trying to stay somewhat on time. Yeah, this is interesting. We spoke with a lot of aggregators in the preparation of this document, and two issues came up time and again as something that were stopping brands from deploying RCS campaigns. And when I'm talking about deploying them, I'm talking about commercial deployment. So the story we heard time and again ran something like, we were doing SMS for this customer and they were happy but wanted something richer. We showed them RCS. They were ecstatic. We did a trial with them on RCS, and they saw that they had 20 or 30 or even more % greater engagement, greater sell-through, and basically every metric was improved by moving to RCS. So they got all ready to do a full RCS campaign, and then they said, how many devices will this land on? What percentage of our customer base? And we said, maybe between 15 and 20%, and they pulled the plug, and they're still doing SMS. The other story we heard was we were all ready to do a campaign, but everything got so confused over at the brand that it's 6 months later and they're still thinking about what images to use. If we go next slide, please. So on the left-hand side, first of all, and full disclosure, one of the companies that I do consultancy work for is active in the provision of rich fallback technology to other messaging companies. So I'm not going to name any names or pull any names into this, but I do work in this area. A lot of brands are really focused on a universal customer experience. They don't care about protocols. They don't care about whether the message is sent by RCS or SMS or carrier pigeon. They just want a universal customer experience. And because of that, they are pulling the plug on campaigns. And I'm sure that if we asked all of the aggregators on this line for a show of hands, everybody would be able to say, yes, I have a brand that was all ready to go and pulled the plug because we couldn't get it to everybody. You need to develop something, be it an SMS with an embedded link or MMS or something, but there needs to be a way to deliver a unified experience to all handsets, including iOS handsets, including non-RCS capable Android handsets right now. Otherwise, brands will never move out of pilot mode, and we will never start to see the money coming through on the solution. And if, as you all know, enough time goes by with no money coming through on the solution, organizations move on to the next thing, and the customers move on to the next thing. So I think it's critically important. A lot of the bigger messaging companies, aggregators, already have taken steps to provide this service, but there's still an awful lot more that haven't. Something needs to be done to be able to provide your customer with at least a story for how you deliver a universal customer experience. Secondly, capability lookup has to be available, whether a country is delivered by Google Guest or delivered by carriers or a combination of the two. A unified way of doing capability lookup must be arranged in country between the service providers. And finally, and this is based on experience that was fed back to us from aggregators, whatever you do, stay in channel. A solution that says we will send our RCS capable customers this campaign, and the ones that aren't, we will target over WhatsApp or we will target over something else. If it's landing in two different inboxes on the customer's device, the brand is not going to be interested. You need to stay in channel. And if that means going completely OTT, then go completely OTT. But customers react very badly to a situation where some messages are coming in on an OTT app or on the company's app, and some are coming into their messaging inbox. That doesn't work. The second side of it, in terms of operational efficiency, this is simply a growing pain, but it has the risk of hampering the growth. From the brand's point of view, again, if we had a show of hands from the aggregators, I would be surprised if any of them were to say we have not had a situation where a brand has just gotten bogged down by the wealth of possibilities of RCS. Something needs to be done to educate agencies and marketeers about the capabilities of the solution. And while GSMA did a pretty good job of evangelizing to operators and to platform providers and to aggregators, nothing near enough was done to agencies and marketeers. And I think this is something that the aggregators have to pick up the cudgels on and deliver themselves, so that people start to understand what all you can do with RCS. A couple of aggregators have communicated to me that the only way that they have broken out of this month after month after month of discussing what pictures should we use, what piece of text should we use, what should go on the carousel, what should those quick response buttons say, with this fantastic functionality that brands are just squandering, that what they've actually started to do is when they go into a new brand, they tell them that all it does is put pictures in. And they get them using a campaign where they just add the company's logo. And after a couple of months, they say, you know, we could also put a carousel of pictures in. And the brand goes for that and is happy to do that. And slowly but surely, they drip feed all of the functionality of RCS into this company. But they do it one or two features at a time, because their experience is that if you show them all of the functionality of RCS, basically they go into a room and they never come back out. They spend the next 6 months trying to decide which picture of a hamburger to put in the hamburger ad. So manage your brands and educate them. And I think that is a role that is primarily going to come down to the aggregators to do. Secondly, and this is where the aggregators are complaining rather than being complained about, for the operators, you have to understand that success in RCS does not mean 20 or 30 or 100 brands. It means thousands of brands and tens of thousands of campaigns. And the challenge for operators here, and the challenge to operators here, is to scale for that. Because if it is becoming onerous to get a brand registered, if it's becoming difficult to get a particular campaign approved, then the brands are going to lose patience with it and they're going to walk and go somewhere else. One of the things that I personally believe is keeping RCS in the fight is just how difficult and onerous it is to get an Apple Business Chat or a WhatsApp campaign approved. It's really an unenjoyable process. If getting an RCS chatbot out and getting an RCS campaign launched is an enjoyable process, then more brands will do that. That is almost guaranteed. So to operators, look at your internal processes, see what you can automate, see what you can remove altogether, and see, can you scale for a world where you have thousands of brands and tens of thousands of campaigns, because that's what success looks like. Any questions on any of that?
That's a lot of information to take in, Dave. I'm also just conscious that there's just to finish off the updates from the guidelines, and then we'll take the questions at the end.
Great.
Because there were a couple of topics that are covered by MEF's program that it's worth covering off. Thanks.
Sure, thanks. So in the sections that were already there, fraud management has been an issue since the very beginning. We renamed that section Sender Verification and Fraud Management because sender verification is emerging as the massive advantage that RCS has over anything else, and the key topic in terms of preventing fraud. We recommend now that sender verification be mandatory, whereas we weren't recommending that before, and that everybody should move to mandatory as soon as possible. We also look at the challenge of having different companies doing sender verification, and even companies, standalone companies, being set up or moving into the area of sender verification as an agent. And we recommend that something be done to make sure that all of these companies, first of all, are verifying on some sort of common quality standard, so that there doesn't become a least cost, lowest bar verification authority that everybody floods to and drags down the quality of the entire process. That instead, some organization should be established that these verification authorities should be part of, to ensure that while they may all do their verification differently, and they can all have proprietary processes or proprietary information involved in the verification, that they are all of a common quality and therefore can trust each other, and therefore a brand can verify with one and have that verification accepted by all, because that's the ultimate demand of the marketplace. Finally, customer education, which was something we talked about before, remains crucial. On the commercialization side, still promoting the idea of a common approach, a common definition of per message and per session, and that the industry adopts that. The advent of the Google guest terms plus various industry action means that this is more or less happening already, with a few operator exceptions. Everybody is aligning around a similar pricing model, not aligning around the same price point, let me hasten to add, because that's not something we would even recommend, but a similar pricing model, so that brands are no longer complaining, for the most part, that they've no idea what the thing is going to cost them. We talk about commercialization of discovery, which is a new section, and we also have a new section that we added on innovative charging models. So looking into the world of affiliate marketing, and not only the charge for sending a message, but charge per click, charge per sale, charge per conversion, charge per registration. There are a lot of different models in affiliate marketing, and we try to provide a little look into that in this document. I think that's anything else.
On the further updates, no, I think that covers all of the slides. Question on verification. Let me just read this out. Verification is great to combat fraud and a big advantage. However, phishing attempts and other fraud types may still happen over P2P. How can operators protect themselves against that? In other words, how do we avoid RCS synforms?
Yeah,
good question.
It's a good question, and the root of the answer, I think, lies back in the RCS specification, where traffic needs to be identified at the outside as being personal or business traffic, and the various tools and advantages of RCS business messaging in terms of the logo, the whole framework of carousels and quick response buttons and everything like that, that just does not appear if the message is not tagged in the header as being business traffic. So the challenge there is to inform and advise customers that if the message looks like just any other chat message that you would receive from another citizen, then it is not business traffic. And if somebody is trying to conduct business over it, it is almost guaranteed that it is some kind of phishing or fraudulent attack. The corollary of that, of course, is that you have to make it affordable and easy for mom and pop businesses, for even small corner stores, to register as businesses and to send business traffic and to be verified. So the challenge is there, comes back on the operators and the verification authorities. But I think it's a very clear message that if you don't see any company logo at all on the message, and yet they're representing themselves as a company, it's not a company, it's fraud.
Thanks, Dave. sticking with the topic of sender verification, can we talk a little bit more about, you mentioned there the verification authorities. So what is the role of a proposed verification authority? What would the framework look like, certification?
And yeah, that's a great question. And Dario, if you'd like to speak to this as well, please feel free to jump in. But to recap what we said in the document, and then I'll open it up to Dario. The feeling is that verification authorities each do their verification in a slightly different way and in a proprietary way, and are unwilling to share how exactly they do their verification with one another. And that's all fine. They have a right to do that. And for whatever commercial or other reasons, operators and other companies should be free to use the verification authority they choose. However, we could massively simplify the market and simplify the experience for brands if any verification authority could verify a company and then have that verification accepted by every other map service, every other operator in the food chain. And that's basically what the verification authority certification framework is all about. It's about having a industry sponsored body whose role is to say, yes, this verification authority meets the standard, and this one perhaps doesn't, and to encourage the industry to move towards using the ones that meet a common quality standard. Dario, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, you said it. It is a complex, simple topic. I mean, verification itself seems to be straightforward. It's when you open it up, you understand that, first of all, definitions are dramatically different. As you were saying, the secret recipe that every verification authority might have is slightly different. But you need to understand fundamentally what you're doing. Whether you're verifying a brand, which is a trademark, you're verifying a company, you're verifying the reputation of a company, all of those have got different pros and cons, and actually you could smartly use many of them. Interestingly, we had recently a roundtable in Spain. We even have a specific course around verification authorities. But when we asked generally to everybody, how long to the brands and aggregators, how long would you like to have the verification authority process, the onboarding, first time you use it, how long will it take? And the majority of people responded, if I'm not mistaken, within 70%, less than an hour. And that's a scary proposition if you're trying to do all of those things, including the complex checking of a brand, which is, requires human intervention sometimes, to, the probably faster elements. So we are seeing that there's a different speed, different levels, and there will be our first discussions. And you're right. The second question is also, how do you make sure that you don't have to do a brand verification for every operators you have in a country, or let alone in Europe or in Latin America? There is a multiple process that the onboarding becomes too big. So MEF has been asked by its members directly to work on these. So I don't know, I think the good news is we're working on that with the industry, and if you know of anybody else which is working on that, we would love to talk to them. And we'll try probably to give a bit more of structure, a list of understanding, and possibly the compliance that you are referring to, a bit of certification. A final point that I would say on verification authority as well is the questions that some of us might also have on how do we compare, use, know where they are, etc. So we are obviously working on that to make a list, to make some of the operators were asking where can I go, and there are companies out there that are very happy to talk to you. Let us know if you're looking for one. And again, and finally, next week there's going to be a call, I believe, to understand, to make sure that the data that we process in this verification authority is all compliant with a different privacy GDPR-like system, etc. So there's going to be additional revisions and understanding. I hope I didn't bore you there with all the details, but just to give you flavors of what's happening right now in RCS and verification authority, we're now opening the book and understanding there are some important rules and guidelines to be written as well.
Thanks, Dario. I think that answers some of the questions that have come in, but let's just check. Sorry.
Just looking at Paul Rupert's question, is anybody actually launching a verification authority service? Yes, I'm aware of 2 companies that offer verification authority to businesses. I don't think it's fair to them or their competitors to name them here, but I know that there are 2 companies out there who are doing that at the moment, and potentially more. There may be more than I'm aware of.
Yeah, I think from MEF, we would say that we are aware of 4 companies at least that have got a direct interest and activities in the verification authorities. And more might be coming as well, as we were saying. So we're not naming them, but if anybody is in doubt, let us know. We will share with you the full list of what we know and anybody else.
And Dario, you commented on the complexity here. There's a question about whether the verification authority needs to be in the actual same geographical location as the brand to be verified. What's the view from the group there?
Interesting questions. We hadn't seen that before. My first reaction is I don't see a specific need, as long as, some of the things can be done. Is a question of verifying, or is a question of contracts. VA is working for usually an agent and operator, effectively. As an agent of an operator, so the contracts and the legality of that would apply. In terms of sharing data, there might be some consideration there. But again, that can be done virtually rather than in a direct way. So there are some complexity. Very good that you bring these questions and make us think that definitely needs to be a chapter on that as well. Does it need to be? Not always, but you're probably sharing a bit of insight of in some situation. Definitely, you might need to do. In some others, maybe it's a gray area, not so much.
And what about the idea that one of the attendees has posted about using a similar model for SSL certificates, so over the web?
David, do you want to say something? I'll jump in and say that actually that was taken as a reference model, I believe, when we are generically talking about how a VA would work. Important to remember to us that they are different in the way they're administered. Nevertheless, I think we need to start comparing VAs to some of these established models so that it's easier even to refer to and to understand them. But at the same time, there are lots of questions that are very specific. We've seen geography, we've seen operator interconnectivity, which is very specific to the VA as well.
Yeah, I think you said it, Dario, that it is definitely under consideration as a model, as a concept, rather than as a specific technology. But we're still at the early days. I don't think any decision has been made.
And I think some of those, the questions, I really like the questions, all of them so far, but as I said, it also shows how much work we still need to do on the topic of verification authority. Pretty excited. We've opened up a specific debate. We actually are discussing whether we should try out some of these things with operators and see how, on a dry run, some of these things could really work. If anybody's interested, has got ideas, we are more than open to listen to them as well. But over the next few months, really starting with the end of June, we will put together a bit more of a solid guideline on verification authorities. I should still say that the RCS Best Practices 2.0, it's right now the best place to start if you have willing to go in more details on the verification authorities. There will be more details, as I told you before. This is a never-ending process right now, it seems. But we will come up with a more detailed VA framework rules, and you're all welcome to participate as MEF and outside. Yep.
Thanks, Dario. Any final questions? We're nearly at the hour. So I think that was a really useful walk through of the guidelines. So thanks, Dave and Dario, for the discussion as well. I just wanted to finish up on a quick promotion of MEF's next webinars. All or a couple of them that are around this topic. So, Dave, you've talked a lot about operational efficiency for RCS being a key thing that the guideline looks at, and kind of a real call to action. And Dario, you mentioned the roundtables series that MEF has, which brings together the brands and agencies, the networks, and the ecosystem to discuss these very topics. We're obviously a little bit hampered by COVID-19, but at the moment we continue those discussions online with the network operators and the ecosystem elites, kind of sharing use cases and sharing challenges. So the next one that's coming up, these are at a country level, is next week actually, in the UK, for those of you interested in that market. And then more broadly, on the topic of RCS, then on the 28th of May, we have a discussion looking at omnichannel, where RCS fits into that, and specifically for contact centres. And what they're doing there. So with guest speakers from Cineverse and Vonage. And then on the 9th of June, then a hot topic, what will be the impact of COVID-19? So our partners at Mobile Squared are currently busy reforecasting their 5-year forecasts for all A2P, so SMS, RCS, and WhatsApp. And looking at the impact of COVID-19 on their forecasts. So MEF has an exclusive preview of those results. So do join us for that session. I think Carol's put all of the links in the chat. So we hopefully see you there. So thanks everyone for attending. Thank you for those of you that asked your questions. I hope this has been useful. As Dario says, the discussions will continue in MEF's working groups, at the round tables, at a country level, and also at future webinars. So thanks very much for attending. The recording of this will be available on MEF's website in due course, and for MEF members on the call, then you can download the slides as well, and obviously the guidelines are available. Please do use them. They're really designed to help everyone in the industry accelerate the market. So thank you very much, and stay safe. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks, Dave and Dario.